I'm the one who found it. The thing in the closet. I should say that plain at the start, because everyone in the palace spent the weeks after whispering about who found it, and they never landed on me. And I let them not land on me, and that's its own kind of lie I've carried. It was me, a guard, nobody. The man they posted outside the late Queen's apartments to keep the rooms sealed until the family decided what to do with a dead woman's things. Her name was Queen Mireille. You won't have heard of her small kingdom, a long time ago, the kind of place that doesn't make it into the songs, but she made it into mine. She's been in my head every day for going on 40 years, and I've never told a soul what I'm about to tell you. And I'm only telling it now because I'm the last one left who knows. And a thing that only lives in one old man's head is already half dead, and some things shouldn't be allowed to die. Let me tell it the way it happened, slow, the way I found it. I should explain about the apartments first. When a queen dies, her rooms get sealed. Not locked away forever, there's an inventory to be done, jewels to be counted, the new queen or the daughters to decide what's kept and what's given and what's burned. But for the first while, the rooms are frozen. A guard outside the door, nobody in, nothing touched. It's meant to protect the valuables from light fingers in the days when everyone's grief is loud and nobody's watching the silver. So that was my post. 3 weeks I stood outside Queen Mireille's sealed apartments, and in all that time the only one who came was the king. Every night, after the court was asleep, he'd come down the corridor alone, no attendants, which a king never does. A king is never alone, and he'd stop at the door and he wouldn't go in. He'd just stand there, with his hand flat on the wood, for a long time. And then he'd go back the way he came without a word to me, and I'd pretend I hadn't seen, because that's the job. You see everything and you say nothing. You are a witness who has taken a vow of blindness. I want to tell you what that man's face looked like those nights, but I don't have the words for it. I've tried for 40 years. The closest I can get is, he looked like a man standing outside a room he wasn't allowed back into, which he was. She was dead. The room was full of her and empty of her at the same time, and he couldn't go in, and he couldn't stay away, and so every night he came and put his hand on the door and grieved at a piece of wood. I judged him a little those first nights. I'm ashamed of it now. I thought all that power, a whole kingdom, and you can't even open a door. I didn't understand yet that the door wasn't the thing he couldn't open. The thing he couldn't open was inside him, and the door was just where he came to feel it. The smell was the first strange thing. 3 weeks in, the inventory order finally came down. I was to admit the chamberlain and 2 clerks at the second bell to begin the count. But the chamberlain took bad oysters. The palace laughed about it later, and the clerks wouldn't start without him. And so the order got muddled the way orders do. And for one afternoon, the responsibility for opening the rooms and making sure nothing was amiss fell to the man at the door. Me. So I went in, alone, which I shouldn't have strictly, but the seal had to be checked and someone had to do it and there was no one else, and I told myself I was only checking that nothing had been disturbed. That's true. It's also true that I wanted to see. A man stands outside a dead queen's rooms for 3 weeks watching her husband grieve at the door, and something in him wants to know what's on the other side. I won't pretend I was pure about it. The rooms were beautiful and they were terrible, the way the rooms of the recently dead always are. Everything waiting. A book left open on a table face down, holding her place forever at a page she'd never finish. A shawl over the back of a chair, still holding the shape of her shoulders. That's the cruelest thing about death, I've decided after a life of being near it. It's not the big absence. It's the small things that don't know yet. The shawl that's still waiting for her to come back and put it on. And the smell. Her scent still in everything, some flower I couldn't name. And under it the particular smell a person leaves in a room they've lived in a long time, which is just the smell of a life, and which I won't try to describe because you know it. Everyone knows it. Everyone has walked into a room after someone and known they were there from the air alone. I checked the seal. Nothing disturbed. I should have left. I didn't leave. I went to the closet. I don't know why. I've asked myself 40 years. The jewels were elsewhere in cases in the strong room properly counted. The closet was just her clothes. There was nothing in there worth a guard's attention, nothing to check, no reason to open it. But the king's nightly grief had got into me by then. 3 weeks of watching a powerful man fail to open a door does something to you. I think I wanted to do the thing he couldn't. I think, in some confused way, I opened that closet for him. Stupid, sentimental, but there it is. I told you I'd tell it true. It was a deep closet, a whole small room of its own, the way grand people have. Dresses on one side, ordered by some logic only she had known, going back years. I could see her life in them, the fashions changing as you went deeper, the girl queen's bright colors at the far end giving way to the darker, heavier things of her last years. A whole woman hung up in cloth. And at the very back, alone, apart from everything else, under a plain linen cover like you'd put over a birdcage at night, the Coronation Robe. I knew it the moment I lifted the cover. Everyone in the kingdom knew that robe. White and gold ermine at the collar, the long train she'd worn the day she was crowned, the day half the kingdom had stood in the rain to see her go by, the most photographed, most painted, most famous garment in the whole realm. They'd put her in it in every official portrait for 30 years. It was practically the flag of her. When people thought of Queen Mireille, they thought of that robe. And it was ruined. That's what I found. That's the thing that left the palace in silence when it finally came out, though it came out wrong, and I'll get to that. The robe was destroyed. Not by moths, not by time, not by accident. Someone had taken it apart. The seams were opened carefully, not torn, opened, with a blade or a seam ripper by a patient hand. The gold thread had been picked out of the white in long furrows, leaving the cloth scarred and pale where the embroidery used to be. The ermine was half gone, and the inside, the lining, the part no one ever saw, the part that lay against the queen's own skin on the most important day of her life. The inside was covered in writing. Small writing, cramped, in ink that had soaked into the white silk and could never come out. Line after line after line, filling the whole inner surface of the robe, turned in on itself, hidden, a secret sewn against a body. I stood in that closet with the famous, ruined robe in my hands, and the dead woman's smell in the air, and the afternoon light going gold through the one high window, and I read what was written inside the most beautiful garment in the kingdom. And I understood why the king couldn't open the door. I'm not going to tell you everything it said. Some of it isn't mine to give away, even now, even with everyone dead. But I'll tell you the shape of it, the way I told the shape of things to myself in the years after, to make them bearable. The queen had written it herself. I knew her hand from 100 proclamations. It was hers, no question, though smaller and looser than her public hand, the way your writing gets when it's only for you. And she'd been writing it for a long time. You could see it in the ink, some lines old and brown, some recent and black, layers of years. She'd been opening that robe and writing inside it, in secret, alone, and sewing it shut again, and hanging it back under its linen cover for most of her reign. It was the truth. That's the simplest way I can say it. Everything she could never say out loud, she'd written against the inside of the robe she was crowned in. The robe that was the public her, the flag of her, the her that smiled in the portraits, she'd filled its hidden side with the private her, the one no one was allowed to meet. There were things about the marriage, about a love that had gone somewhere cold and stayed there, between two people who ruled side by side and were strangers in the dark. There were things about a child, a daughter I gathered, lost very young, before my time, a grief the public had been told was an illness, and that the robe told differently, told in a way that suggested the official story had been a kindness wrapped around something the queen could never forgive herself for. There were things about the kingdom, decisions she'd been forced to sign, names of people who'd suffered for the crown's convenience, that she'd kept like wounds because she had no one to confess them to. A queen has no one to confess to. I understood that standing there. Think about it. Who does she tell? A priest who answers to her husband, a friend who'd sell it, a daughter dead. She was the most surrounded woman in the kingdom and the most alone, and she'd found the only confessor who'd never betray her, a robe. A thing of cloth, the very symbol of the public life that was killing her, turned inside out and made the keeper of her private soul. She'd been talking to it for 30 years. And then she died, and her secret was hanging in a closet under a linen cover, waiting for a clerk to find it during the inventory and read it aloud to the kingdom. That's the part that stopped my heart standing there, the inventory. The clerks were coming the next morning. They'd open the closet the way I had, and they'd find the famous robe, and they'd lift the cover, and they'd see the writing, and they would not be guards trained to see everything and say nothing. They'd be clerks. They'd read it, and it would be in the palace gossip by noon and across the kingdom by the next festival. Every wound that woman had hidden for 30 years torn open and passed around and laughed at and used. Her marriage, her dead daughter, the kingdom's quiet crimes, all of it naked, for a court that had never once let her be a person. And the king who came every night and put his hand on the door and couldn't go in. I understood finally all the way. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd lived beside her 30 years. He knew what that robe was. That's why he couldn't open the door. Not grief alone, terror. Behind that door was the truth of his wife and his marriage and his reign, written in her own hand. And he couldn't bring himself to go in and destroy it because destroying it meant destroying the last of her. But he couldn't leave it there to be found either. And so he was frozen every night. A powerful man made helpless, grieving and afraid at a piece of wood. He couldn't open the door because he couldn't bear to do what had to be done. So I did it for him. I won't tell you exactly how. A guard knows how to make a thing disappear. It's half the job, the unspoken half. I'll only say that there's a furnace under the old kitchens that burns hot enough to take anything, and that it ran all night sometimes for the bread, and that no one counts what a guard carries through the lower passages in a sack at the dead hour. I want to be honest that I hesitated. God, I hesitated, because it wasn't mine to destroy, it was hers. 30 years of her soul, the only true record of the only true her, the one place in all the world where Queen Mireille had been allowed to be a whole and aching human being. And I was going to put it in a fire. Who was I? A guard. A nobody. What right did I have to decide that a queen's confession should burn? But I kept thinking about the clerks, about the court, about what they'd do with her dead daughter's name, with her cold marriage, with her midnight self. I kept thinking that she'd never meant any living eye to read it. She'd sewn it shut. Every time, she'd hidden it under a cover at the back of a closet. She'd written it to no one, the way you talk to the dead or to God or to the dark. It was never meant to be found. The inventory finding it would be a violation worse than any she'd suffered alive. And I thought the kindest thing, the only loyal thing, is to make sure the thing she hid stays hidden. To be the one confessor who keeps the secret. To finish what she started when she sewed it shut. So I read it all first, every line. I owed her that. I felt that one person should witness it the way she'd written it, with love and not with hunger, before it was gone. I sat on the floor of her closet as the light died, and I read a dead queen's whole hidden heart, and I wept, which I'm not ashamed of, and when I was done I covered her over and I carried her secret down to the fire, and I gave it back to the dark she'd written it to. The most famous robe in the kingdom, gone, and the truth inside it gone with it, by my hand. The silence I keep mentioning, the palace falling silent, that came the next day, but not for the reason you'd think. And this is where the story got away from the truth and became the version everyone whispered. The clerks came, the closet was opened, and the coronation robe, the priceless, famous, irreplaceable coronation robe, was gone. Just gone. An empty linen cover at the back of the closet and nothing inside it. That's what left the palace in silence. The theft. The impossible theft of the kingdom's most sacred garment from a sealed room guarded day and night. The scandal of it ran for years. They questioned everyone. They questioned me, of course they questioned me. I'd had the door and I stood there with my unmoved guard's face, the same face I'd kept the whole of my career, and I said I'd seen nothing, admitted no one, that the seal had been unbroken, which by then it was, because I'd resealed it myself. And they believed me, because I was reliable the way a wall is reliable, and nobody suspects the wall. They decided eventually that it must have been taken before the sealing, that some servant in the chaos of the Queen's death had spirited it away to sell. They never found it, of course. You can't find ash. A few people were dismissed on suspicion, which is a guilt I carry, innocents who paid for my choice, though I made sure quietly over the years in the small ways a guard can that none of them ended in the snow. I'd watched someone end in the snow once. I never let it happen on my account again. So the kingdom thought a robe was stolen. The truth was a soul was protected. And the only two people who ever knew the difference were a dead queen and the guard who read her. And the king. He came one more time. After the theft was discovered, after the questioning, after the palace had settled into its permanent low hum of who could have done it. He came down the corridor at the dead hour, alone, the way he had every night for 3 weeks. But this time he didn't stop at the door. He stopped at me. He looked at me a long time. And I looked back and I kept my face a wall because that was the job, that was always the job, but a wall can be looked through if the looker has the eyes for it, and I think he did. I think he saw, in whatever was or wasn't in my face, that I knew. That the empty cover and the unbroken seal and the steady, reliable guard who'd had the door were not 3 separate facts but one fact. And that the fact was standing in front of him, keeping his wife's secret as carefully as she'd kept it herself. He didn't say anything. He couldn't, of course. To say anything was to know something, and a king cannot know that a guard burned the Queen's coronation robe. That's a sentence that ends with someone hanged. So we said nothing, both of us, fluent in the language of saying nothing. 2 men who'd loved the same woman in our different small ways, standing in a cold corridor, agreeing in total silence to carry a thing to our graves. And then he did something I've never told anyone, the last thing, the thing I'll close on. He took my hand, the king. He took the hand of a guard, which is not done, which breaks every line of the hierarchy I'd given my life to. He took my hand in both of his and he held it, hard, the way you hold something to keep from falling, and his hands were shaking, and there were tears on his face that a king should never let a guard see, and he held my hand and he wept without a sound for the length of maybe 10 breaths. And then he let go and straightened, and put his king's face back on the way I put my wall's face back on, and he walked away down the corridor, and we never spoke of it, not once, not in all the years either of us had left. He's dead now, long dead. So is everyone who stood in the rain to see her crowned, and everyone who whispered about the theft, and everyone who was dismissed for it, and everyone except me. I'm the last one who knows there was no theft, that the robe wasn't stolen but freed, that inside the most public garment in the history of that small forgotten kingdom, a lonely woman had hidden her whole true self, and that her self was read once with love, by a nobody on the floor of her closet, and then given safely back to the dark before the world could get its hands on it. People still tell the story I'm told in that country, the Queen's lost robe. They've made it a mystery, a romance, a ghost story. They say it vanished by magic, that she took it with her, that it'll reappear when the kingdom needs her most. Myths. The truth got buried so deep that only the myths grew over it, the way grass grows over a grave until you'd never know the ground was opened. I don't correct the myths. Let them have the magic. The magic's kinder than the truth, and she'd earned a little kindness, that woman, after a life of having none. But you asked what the guard found in the closet, so now you know, not jewels, not gold, not a scandal. A soul. Sewn into silk, hidden for 30 years, found by accident, and protected by a man who had no right to and did it anyway, because somebody finally had to love her the simple way, by keeping her secret instead of selling it. That's what I found. That's what left the palace in silence. And that's the last time I'll ever tell it.